Imagine for a second that you're in command of what you believe is the most advanced weapon on the planet, a true master of the deep. You think the ocean is your kingdom, right? A place where your skill, your training, and your incredible technology give you the ultimate power, invisibility. Well, this is the story of how that belief was completely shattered, not in some huge fiery battle, but with a slow, creeping dread. The horrifying realization that the rules of the game had changed, that the hunter was now the hunted, and that the ocean itself was listening.
Okay, so let's just jump right into it. If you look at this on paper, it's not even a contest, right? The Imperial Japanese Navy's I-400 class subs were absolute titans. I mean, they were the largest submarines in the world until the nuclear age. These things were longer than an American destroyer ship. They were designed to surface off the coast of, say, California and launch 3 bomber aircraft to attack American cities or the Panama Canal. And then you look at America's standard Gato-class sub and it looks, well, kind of ordinary. Japan was betting big on these technological marvels. But as we're about to see, this war wasn't going to be won by the biggest boat. It was going to be won by the one who could hear in the dark. You know, what's so fascinating here is the sheer ambition. We are talking about a submarine that could go around the world 1.5 times without even needing to refuel. They even had these advanced rubber coatings on the hull to absorb sonar pings, basically making them ghosts. The engineering was just magnificent, and it was a huge source of national pride. The Japanese submariners themselves, some of the best trained in the world. They were supremely confident in their skills and their machines, and why wouldn't they be? They had every reason to believe they are completely untouchable. So, what was the game plan for these incredible machines? Well, Japanese naval strategy was built around this one big idea, a single, decisive battle, a naval knockout punch that would cripple the enemy fleet. So they saw their submarines as assassins, stealthy hunters meant to stalk and sink the most valuable targets, aircraft carriers and battleships. And on the surface, that sounds pretty logical, right? A kind of warrior's code. You use your best stuff to hunt their best stuff. But this focus on one glorious battle, it hit a fatal flaw. While Japan's elite subs were out hunting for warships, American submarines were up to something else entirely. Something far, far more devastating. This question right here, this is the absolute heart of our story. The Japanese submarine force was ready for a fight they could see, a duel between giants. What they weren't prepared for was a war against an invisible system, a trap laid not with mines or nets, but with sound itself. They were about to learn that the ocean's greatest gift, its vast, dark, empty depths, was about to be turned into their worst nightmare. So how did the Americans build this trap? It all started with this little thing. Meet this Sonobuoy. It really doesn't look like much, does it? Just a simple floating canister you drop out of a plane. But this little device was a complete revolution. See, before the Sonobuoy, a plane hunting a submarine was basically blind the second that sub went under. The submarine just had to dive deep and wait. But the Sonobuoy changed the entire equation. All of a sudden, American planes could hear everything happening underwater. The submarine's greatest defense, its invisibility, was about to become totally obsolete. And this is where the genius of the system really shines. A plane wouldn't just drop one of these, it'd drop a whole pattern of them, creating this invisible listening grid on the ocean's surface. The moment a submarine passed through that grid, the sound of its propellers, its engines, would get picked up and beamed straight back to the plane. Just think about that for a second. You're a Japanese submarine commander, you've just done a perfect crash dive. You're deep, you're silent, you think you're safe, hidden in the black. But miles above you, some radio operator is putting on a headset and listening to the thrum of your propellers, tracking your every single move. You're a ghost who doesn't even know he's being haunted. And this isn't just theory. This was the terrifying reality for the crew of the I-52, a huge cargo sub carrying 2 tons of gold to Nazi Germany. On June 23, 1944, they're spotted on radar. They do exactly what they're trained to do. They crash dive, thinking they've escaped. But then, the sonobuoys are dropped. For the next 15 minutes, they're not an invisible threat anymore. They're just a blip on a screen, a sound in a pair of headphones, hunted by a system they can't see, can't fight, and don't even comprehend. And then comes the final piece of the puzzle, an acoustic torpedo that literally follows the sound of their own propellers right to their hull. This is the part that just sticks with you. The American radio operator in the plane, he didn't see an explosion. He heard the end of the I-52 transmitted up from a tiny buoy floating on a dark ocean, crackling and crunching noises like a tin can being crushed. That wasn't just a sound. That was the sound of a 350-foot submarine imploding under the immense pressure of the deep sea. It was the sound of a hull disintegrating and the final terrible moments of over 100 men
all captured on a wire spool thousands of feet in the air.
112 men. They weren't just sunk. They were killed by an integrated system of radar, sonobuoys, and acoustic torpedoes. They died without ever knowing what was hunting them. This wasn't just the sinking of a submarine. This was the total psychological demolition of an entire naval force's confidence.
And this question began to haunt every single Japanese submariner. As whispers and stories of these impossible encounters started to spread, this deep paranoia began to set in. Diving deep to escape wasn't a guarantee of safety anymore. The deep ocean, which was once their sanctuary, now felt like a huge, empty room where the enemy could hear every move they made. It was the terrifying realization that their most fundamental tactics were now completely useless.
And if the Sonobuoy was the first shock to the system, Operation Barney was the final, brutal knockout. The Sea of Japan was supposed to be a fortress, okay? It was protected by these massive minefields. It was Japan's safe backyard. But in June of 1945, 9 American submarines did the impossible. They used a new type of forward-looking sonar to literally navigate through the minefields, a system whose warning chime the crews nicknamed Hell's Bells. They just slipped right inside. And for 15 days, they wreaked havoc in waters Japan considered absolutely secure, sinking 28 ships. The message couldn't have been clearer. Nowhere is safe.
This quote, it's from the captain of one of those giant I-400s, and it just gets right to the heart of the matter. For him, the moment he knew it was over wasn't in a battle. It was just listening to American radio chatter. The sheer volume of it, the casual, efficient way they coordinated these huge operations, the abundance of everything, it painted a picture of an industrial and logistical machine that Japan just could not compete with. This wasn't a war of ships anymore. It was a war of systems.
Seriously, just stop and think about this for a moment. What does that do to a person, to a sailor, a commander, to keep going out to sea, to keep following orders, to risk your life every single day, all while carrying this quiet, certain, crushing knowledge that your cause is completely hopeless? This was the secret burden that the Japanese submarine force carried in the final year of the war.
Now let's look at the brutal math behind that feeling. Japan, for all its incredible I-400s, struggled to build and maintain a force of about 70 submarines total. In that same period, the United States built 314. America was replacing its losses faster than Japan could even inflict them. U.S. shipyards were running 24/7, just churning out submarines with an efficiency that was simply unimaginable. This was never a fair fight. It was an industrial tsunami.
And here's the direct result of that industrial power, guided by that different strategy we talked about earlier. Remember how the Japanese were hunting warships? The American submarine force, all 314 of them, went after Japan's supply lines, and they gutted them. They're responsible for sinking more than half of all Japanese merchant ships. They cut off the flow of oil, of rice, of rubber, everything a modern nation needs to fight a war. They literally strangled the Japanese empire into submission, one cargo ship at a time.
And this is so important to understand. It wasn't just one magic gadget. It was a massive, systematic technological advantage across the board. American subs had radar from day one. They had computers that automatically calculated where to fire a torpedo, while Japanese commanders were literally doing the math by hand with a slide rule. They had that special sonar to see minefields. At every single level, finding the enemy, attacking the enemy, and just surviving, the Americans had a decisive, integrated technological edge.
And this is the grim result. Technology isn't some abstract thing. It has a very real human cost. Japan lost 130 submarines. The casualty rate for its submariners was over 70%. Being assigned to a submarine became known as a death sentence. By contrast, the American submarine service, which was still incredibly dangerous, had a casualty rate around 22%. That difference isn't about courage or skill. It is a direct reflection of the technology gap. One side had the tools to survive, and the others simply did not.
Can you just imagine this moment? After the war ends, Japanese commanders are brought on board the very American submarines that had been hunting them. They're given tours, and they finally see it all with their own eyes. The radar screens, the sonar systems, the targeting computers. Every single fear they had, every ghost they imagined was stalking them in the dark. It was all real. Their paranoia wasn't paranoia at all. It was just an accurate assessment of reality.
But this is where the story takes its most important turn. And honestly, this is why it still matters so much today. The brutal lessons learned in this crushing defeat directly shaped the Japan we know now.
The entire nation turned away from building these magnificent but ultimately useless giants. Instead, Japanese industry, led in part by the very same naval officers who had experienced this tech gap firsthand, focused on what had beaten them: quality control, technological excellence, and building integrated, reliable systems that just worked. The DNA of this lesson is inside the Toyota in your garage, the Sony TV in your living room. A painful military lesson became the bedrock of an economic miracle.
And that brings us right back to today, with one final, crucial question. The Sonobuoy was an invisible technology. It completely changed the balance of power. It made the strong weak and redefined what security even meant. So, when we look around today, at cyberspace, at artificial intelligence, at satellite networks, what are the invisible technologies that are quietly redrawing the map of power right now? And who is busy mastering them while others are still planning to fight the last war? That's the real lesson from that secret war, fought deep beneath the waves.